I did it. I finally found a Scotch whisky that I really like. This week, let me tell you about this whisky right here, the Glenallachie 12-year-old single malt. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the Whiskey Nerd, and like I said, this week I'm talking about the 12-year-old single malt from Glenallachie. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now, first off, I will say that I got recommended this Scotch whisky. So I've been trying a few different Scotch, just kind of basic Scotch whiskies, and I put out the call to you people, what kind of Scotch whiskies should I try? And some people recommended the Glenallachie. So I went out and I got a couple of mini bottles of the 12-year-old and the 15-year-old, and I really liked it. So as you can see, I've already had a bit of this whiskey already, so I do quite like it, and I decided to get myself full-size bottles of the 12-year-old, the 15-year-old, and the 10-year-old cask strength. So those reviews will be coming out soon, and I've also got recommendations to try things like the Ardbeg Ugdal, like a good smoky whiskies, and a few Scotch whiskies from Islay, like I think the Port Charlotte, which people say are very good examples of those heavier, peatier styles of those Scotch whiskies. So if you've got any more recommendations, let me know down in the comments below. But today, let's focus on this whiskey right here. It is a speyside single malt Scotch whisky. So speyside is the region of Scotland where it comes from, and typically whiskies from speyside are going to be a bit softer and a bit sweeter, less smoky, and whiskies from Islay, whereas they'll be more like peaty and smoky. Whereas it's not a hard rule, like you can have smoky whiskies from the lowlands, from the speyside, and you can have non-peated whiskies from Islay, but typically if it's from speyside or those kind of lowland regions, it'll be a lighter, softer whiskey. And this here is, if there is peat in it, it's very light amounts of peat, so it's mostly that sweet whiskey. It is, like I said, a single malt Scotch whisky coming from the Glenallachie distillery. Apparently they were kind of, I guess, reinvigorated a few years back by Billy Walker, the head distiller, and he kind of worked with them to create a new kind of core range of products that will be a bit better and a bit more kind of reliably tasty. And Billy Walker has actually been involved in a few distilleries, even over here in Ireland. He helped, I think, set up or start up the cask program for the Ahru distillery. They're distilling whiskey, so they're not yet producing whiskey, but he helped them source a load of casks. So I take it that Billy Walker knows his way around a cask, and this here is kind of the fruits of that labor. It's their like entry level Scotch whisky. Now I know a 12-year-old single malt doesn't sound like it's an entry level, but if you compare it to something like a Redbreast 12, where that is the entry level for those Redbreast whiskies, like at 12-year-old, gonna have a nice good amount of flavor. And that flavor comes from those cask programs that I mentioned. So apparently they don't say it on the bottle, they don't say it on the package that this whiskey comes in, but I did a bit of digging online, and apparently it was aged in first and second fill bourbon casks, virgin oak casks, PX sherry casks, and Oloroso sherry casks. So you're going to get a lot of sweetness and roundness from that first fill bourbon cask. You're going to get some of that spirit coming through from the second fill bourbon, like it won't overpower. You're going to get that core malty flavor. The virgin oak will give you a bit of spice and a bit of like almost charred notes. The Oloroso is going to give you dried fruits, nuttiness, and then the PX sherry gives you more like a syrupy flavor. So there's a lot of casks and a lot of influence going into this whiskey. It does come in at 46% ABV, which is always a plus. It is natural color and non-chill filtered, and that is a very nice, rich, natural colour on it. So it's actually quite nice to see the influence that those casks have had with that natural colour coming through into the final product. So I think that's enough talking about the whiskey. Let's go in for the nose, although, spoiler alert, I do quite like this one. So let's go in for the nose on the Glenallachie 12. Okay, immediately it is malty. You get that very distinct hit of malty kind of whiskey coming through, but behind it is a huge hit of sherry. You get a really nice amount of like that, like I was saying, those dried fruits you get from the Oloroso sherry, but they're not like fully dry. It's almost like syrupy, it's almost like honey, because you get that PX sherry influence coming through, which is like a wrapper, very like thick and syrupy flavor coming through on it. There's also like oak spice coming through, but maybe not oak spice as such, not like that heavily charred spicy oak, but like the kind of the tannins of the oak, like the earthy note of that oak is coming through as well, giving it that kind of like a roundness, like a slightly spicy, but not like, not if you're familiar with like virgin oak, it gives this really like heavy punch of spice, like baking spices, cinnamon, things like that. It's not all the way there. It's more like that earthy spice. Maybe like that spice has been tapered back by those first and second fill bourbons, by the sherry influence, but you're still getting a nice amount of oak. And then that bourbon cask kind of is there. It's almost like it's the baseline flavor. You got a lot of malt up front, you get a lot of the sherry influence up front, you get a bit of spiciness, and then underneath it all you get this brown sugar, caramel, like stewed, like it reminds you almost like of a sticky toffee pudding. Like if a sticky toffee pudding, when it's made like traditionally, it's actually made with like figs in it, not just sugar. So you get that bit of like almost dried fruits with a lot of that caramel and butterscotch kind of wrapped up into it. The more I sit with it, the more I'm reminded of like cherry syrup, like these cherries right here, the Luxardo maraschino cherries, like the syrup in there, that marasca syrup. It's very like cherry flavored, very sweet, very syrupy, and it's that kind of flavor that I'm kind of getting here. Like there is that syrupy, dark fruits, but yeah, it's in that cherry, very sweet, very sugary, very wrapped up, syrupy kind of note coming through. Like this is I suppose I've seen people online call it like a sherry bomb, and I wouldn't fully disagree with that. Like it's definitely a lot of sherry, a lot of fruits coming forward, but it's not like a bomb. It's not all the sherry note. You still get that caramel, you still get that kind of bit of oak coming through as well. So I'm going to go in for the palate and see if it stays as nicely as balanced or if the sherry does take over. So let's go in for the palate. Cheers. It's got a really nice, rich, thick, syrupy mouthfeel, but then it is sherry all day. Like you get syrupiness from that PX sherry. You get, like that gives you the mouthfeel, the nice, rich, kind of syrupy mouthfeel, but then kind of dried fruits, almost nuttiness from the Oloroso sherry. And again, that oak spice coming through as well, that nice bit of virgin oak. On the nose, it was more like earthy oak, tannins, things like that. It's still a bit tannic here, but you get more that spicy note in the palate when you're tasting it. Like what that sherry is massively upfront. That's a big note you get. So I'm going to go in for a second sip, chew it a little bit, like let it sit in my palate and see what else I can find behind the sherry. Cheers. The second sip was definitely much more of that spice up front. Like I was getting more of that oak spice, almost like cinnamon, like gingerbread, like that baked gingerbread cookie, like that kind of crystallized, cooked ginger spice coming through with the cinnamon, with the baking spices, with the like that the oak spice as well coming through, the tannins, almost reminiscent of like a dark chocolate. Like I wouldn't say it's a creamy like a dark chocolate, but it's got that like the tannins, the almost bitterness of that kind of dark chocolate coming through behind that big hit of sherry up front. There's a touch of pepper as well into the palate, and as I'm talking, as it's going into the finish, that kind of earthy oak note from the nose does make a bit of a reappearance. So I'm going to go in for another sip and focus on that finish. Cheers. Okay, so up front you get that big hit of like that syrupy sherry hit. Then as it sits in your palate, you get that spiciness, you get that kind of like those gingerbread, almost chocolatey notes. And then as you go into the finish, it kind of, that earthiness comes back. You still get that spice, but it moves into like the tannins, into that kind of drying oak flavor coming through. Like as I'm talking, a little bit like honey as I'm breathing, a little bit of that. I'd say the finish is like medium on it. It's not super long, but it's still kind of hanging around. Got that tannins. It's not really syrupy and sugary. It is that drier kind of those spicy notes lingering on into the finish. As I'm talking now, it's probably faded off completely. So I'd say it's medium, not medium long, not medium short, just down the road, medium finish on the whiskey. Before I give my final thoughts, although I think I've already been very clear that I do like this whiskey, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews every Wednesday, mostly focusing on Irish whiskies, but bourbons and scotches do feature every now and then. And I also put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday, and I will have a cocktail recipe featuring this whiskey right here this Friday. So if you want to check that out, make sure you hit subscribe and make sure you come back. But right now, final thoughts on this. I like it. Like I do quite like it. Like I bought that mini and I tasted it and I said, yes, I have to get myself a full-size bottle of this because I did really, really enjoy it. And it's got that malty character, I think, that comes through, and that's what I really like, because it's not just dominated by the peat. It's not just dominated by the sherry. Like I was saying, I was getting gingerbread and stuff, and that's that cooked malt, the grain notes coming through, giving it a nice base of flavour, on top of which is built all that cask influence, the bourbon casks, the virgin oak casks, the sherry casks, and it came together, I think, in a really nice whiskey. I also have, like I said, the 15-year-old and the 10-year-old cask strength, so they will be reviewed in the future, but this here I think is a really nice whiskey, and as an entry level to their whiskies, it's a fantastic entry level. So I'm going to keep on enjoying it, and I will see you next time. Sláinte.